Lately, a major visa drama has unfolded between Nigeria and Canada, and this time it's not about regular people trying to leave the country. It's about Nigeria's top military officials getting snubbed. Western nations like Canada and the US have been making it tougher for people to enter their countries. But now it's not just everyday Africans facing stricter immigration rules. Africa's wealthiest and most powerful figures are feeling the heat too. In a surprising move, Canada recently denied visas to several senior Nigerian military officials, including General Christopher Musa, the country's chief of defence staff. This decision didn't sit well with Nigeria's elite, who saw it as an insult. So why did Canada reject their visa applications? How are ordinary Nigerians reacting? And what lessons can African countries take from this situation? Let's break it down. On January 31st, 2025, Canada's immigration agency, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC, updated its regulations to give border officials more power to cancel temporary travel documents. This meant that visas and electronic travel authorizations, ETAs, could now be revoked at any time on a case-by-case basis. Canadian authorities justified the changes by saying they would help strengthen national security and protect the integrity of the country's immigration system. Just 2 weeks after these new rules took effect, General Christopher Musa revealed that he and a group of top Nigerian military officials were supposed to travel to Canada for an official event honouring war veterans. But things took an unexpected turn. Their visas were denied. We were invited to the event, and while some of us were granted visas, others were not. It's quite disappointing, General Musa admitted. He went on to say that this incident was a wake-up call for Nigeria, emphasising that the country must stand strong and ensure it is respected on the global stage. The visa rejection quickly became a hot topic in Nigeria, sparking reactions from politicians and government officials. Nigeria's Minister of Interior, Olubunmi Tunji-Ojo, was among those who spoke out. Appearing on Sunrise Daily, a programme on Channel's television, he called the visa denial an insult, not just to General Musa, but to the entire nation. Every country has the right to control its borders, and we respect that, he said. But this decision feels like a direct slap in the face. If the Chief of Defence Staff can be treated this way, what does that mean for the average Nigerian? He also questioned why Canada didn't use diplomatic channels if there were any concerns about the trip. When it comes to visa policies, reciprocity matters. If this is how we're treated, then maybe it's time to rethink our own approach, he added. If you are still watching this video, it means you love it. Why not take out a second and hit that like button? Have you done that? Let us move on. At the centre of the controversy is General Christopher Musa, Nigeria's Chief of Defence Staff, and several high-ranking officers who were all set to travel to Canada for an official event. But when they applied for their visas, Canada shut the door in their faces. At first, many assumed it was part of the West's increasingly strict immigration policies, but now, sources close to the situation are saying something else. It was actually a paperwork blunder. Apparently, the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs was supposed to send a special diplomatic note called a note verbale, along with the visa applications to confirm that the trip was legitimate and had no security concerns. But that didn't happen. Without this official endorsement, Canadian immigration authorities simply processed the applications like any other, which likely led to the rejections. Now, the Nigerian government is scrambling to fix the mess. Meanwhile, the Canadian High Commission in Nigeria has acknowledged the issue, but refused to say anything more, citing privacy reasons. But if you think that explanation was enough to calm the waters, think again. The visa denial has sparked outrage among Nigeria's elite, with top officials expressing their frustration. One of the most vocal critics? Nigeria's National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu. Speaking at an event in Abuja, Ribadu didn't hold back. Canada can go to hell, he declared, making it clear he wasn't interested in diplomatic niceties. He went on to praise General Musa for speaking openly about the issue and called for Nigeria to become a stronger, more self-reliant nation. We need to stop being taken for granted, Ribadu insisted. "This is why we must fix our country." His remarks quickly gained traction, with former Aviation Minister Femi Fani-Kayode jumping in to show his support. In a fiery post on X, formerly Twitter, he applauded Ribadu's boldness. "At last we have an NSA with some backbone," he wrote. "The days of foreign governments treating us with contempt are over." But Fani-Kayode didn't stop there. He took it a step further by throwing shade at Canada itself, questioning its future as an independent nation. Canada might not even be sovereign for much longer if Trump has his way, he claimed, suggesting that the country could end up becoming America's 51st state. They should not only go to hell but also go jump in the lagoon. While Nigeria's elites are fuming over what they see as an insult, the reaction from everyday Nigerians has been very different. Across social media, many Nigerians are actually cheering Canada's decision. To them, it's not about national pride, it's about accountability. Nigerian politicians and top officials are quick to jet off to other countries, while the situation at home keeps getting worse. Prices of food and basic necessities are skyrocketing, the economy is struggling, and yet, instead of fixing things, leaders are busy securing visas for trips abroad. For many Nigerians, the visa denials are a small taste of the everyday struggles they themselves face. Ordinary citizens have been denied visas countless times, often after spending their life savings trying to leave the country for a better future. Some even sell their homes and businesses to fund their escape, only to get rejected with no explanation. So, when politicians now call this a disrespect to Nigeria, regular Nigerians are calling out the hypocrisy. Because let's be honest, Canada is a sovereign nation, just like Nigeria. It has every right to approve or deny visas as it sees fit. And if everyday Nigerians can face visa rejections without the government batting an eye, why should it be any different for the elite? Every day, countless Nigerians face heartbreaking visa denials while trying to leave the country for better opportunities. Some sell their homes, empty their savings, and bet everything on the hope of a fresh start, only to be rejected. Yet when has the Nigerian government ever raised its voice about this? Never. But suddenly, when a few high-ranking military officers were denied visas to Canada, it became a national crisis. So what makes them different from the ordinary Nigerian struggling to survive? And here's where it gets even more absurd. Nigerian politicians are now saying that this visa snub is a wake-up call to fix the country. Seriously? Nigeria has been sinking deeper into crisis for years. The economy is a mess, inflation is out of control, and the power grid is so unreliable that 24-hour electricity feels like a fantasy. People are barely scraping by. That should have been enough motivation to fix the system. But no, it took a visa denial for the elite to suddenly care about making Nigeria work. If that's not pathetic, what is? The truth is, this isn't just about one visa rejection. It's about how the West has always treated African nations, with blatant disregard. And while racism and a sense of superiority definitely play a role, African leaders haven't exactly helped the situation. Instead of pushing for real change, many African leaders have become part of the problem. They cling to power, hoard wealth, and make zero effort to break free from systems designed to keep Africa struggling. They don't dream of industrialized cities or high-tech economies. They're stuck in the now, thinking about how much money and power they can grab today, not how to make life better for future generations. And then they wonder why the West doesn't respect them. Look, respect isn't something you beg for. It's earned. But some African leaders act like all they need to do is show up at international summits in expensive suits, flash a few smiles, and somehow demand respect. Take Kenya's President William Ruto, for example. When Ruto first took office, he was hailed as the new voice of Pan-Africanism. People thought he was different, someone bold enough to stand up to foreign powers. During a Pan-African Parliament summit in South Africa, Ruto gave a fiery speech that had everyone on their feet. He called out the way Africa is treated like a second-class continent. He questioned why over 50 African leaders should fly all the way to Washington for US-Africa summits instead of sending a small team to represent the continent. He even revealed that the US sends invitations for these summits with not-so-subtle threats, basically saying, "Show up or face the consequences." It was a brutal truth bomb. Ruto painted a picture of African leaders lining up like school kids to get their 90 seconds at the microphone, while the US gets all the glory. He said enough was enough. From now on, Africa should meet with other nations as equals, not as some charity case. People loved it. He was called the new Gaddafi, the African champion, the one who would finally break the cycle. But when that didn't last long. Fast forward a few months, and the same Ruto, who was once bashing the West, is now seen as one of its closest allies. Some have even called him Africa's biggest political scam. An article from the Black Agenda report didn't hold back, calling Ruto a neo-colonial puppet, pretending to be a Pan-African hero, while pushing Western interests behind the scenes. Kabando wa Kabando, a former Kenyan MP, openly questioned how anyone could compare Ruto to great African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah or Julius Nyerere, given the flood of corruption cases surrounding his government. And honestly, he's got a point. For all Ruto's big talk, his actions tell a different story. He talks the Pan-African talk, but walks a path that benefits foreign interests. President William Ruto once stood on global stages, sounding like the next big Pan-African leader, bold, unapologetic, and ready to challenge Western influence. He talked about African unity, ditching the dollar and building a self-reliant continent. People compared him to figures like Gaddafi, seeing him as a modern-day disruptor. But fast forward, and Ruto's image has taken a sharp turn. Now, Western nations call him a reliable ally. So here's the real question. Can Africans truly trust any leader who's praised by the same powers that have long exploited the continent? Probably not. Let's be honest. How can a leader demand respect for Africa while cozying up to the very forces Africa has been trying to break free from? Take Ruto's stance on the dollar. He once urged African nations to abandon it and focus on creating a single currency for the continent. It was a bold idea, a way to cut the financial strings tying Africa to foreign powers. But what happened next? He turned right around and started making deals with the IMF and the World Bank, the very institutions that keep the dollar's dominance intact. And it doesn't stop there. In July 2023, at the Pan-African Parliament Summit in Johannesburg, Ruto gave another fiery speech about African independence and the need to cut ties with Western influence. The crowd loved it, standing ovation and all. But within weeks, he was part of the chorus, calling for the reinstatement of Niger's ousted pro-Western president, even though Niger's military had kicked him out over claims of foreign interference. So where's the consistency? Ruto is quick to champion Ukraine's fight against Russia, talking endlessly about respecting sovereignty and international rules. But when it comes to Niger, a fellow African nation fighting off what many see as neo-colonial control by France, he's silent. And that's not the only contradiction. At the African Union's mid-year summit, he praised Pan-Africanism, talking about sovereignty, unity, and economic independence. But just months later, at the UN General Assembly, he was the first to volunteer Kenyan troops for a US-led mission in Haiti, directly undermining Haiti's sovereignty. He speaks about Africa's self-reliance, but then offers Mombasa's ports to handle Ukrainian grain imports instead of pushing Kenya to boost its own food production. And here's another twist. Ruto once hyped up the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, a pact meant to strengthen trade between African countries. But then he signed a trade agreement with the European Union, which runs counter to AfCFTA's core mission. Instead of breaking down trade barriers between African nations, this deal opens doors wider for European goods, making African markets more dependent on imports from the West. So how Pan-African is that really? Even Julius Malema, leader of South Africa's economic freedom fighters, called him out. He questioned Ruto's authenticity, saying, "I don't know if President Ruto means what he says anymore. He talks about ditching the dollar, but his actions, completely different." And it's not just outsiders who are frustrated. Kenyans themselves have been feeling the heat. During his election campaign, Ruto promised change. But today, many Kenyans say life's only gotten harder. They even have a new nickname for him, Zakayo, after the biblical tax collector Zacchaeus, because of his aggressive tax policies. This came after Ruto signed off on a finance bill backed by the IMF and World Bank, aimed at pulling in over $2 billion for Kenya's struggling economy. But the price? Everyday Kenyans now pay more for fuel, food, and even basic mobile money transfers. The bill also included a controversial housing tax, taking money directly from workers' pockets to fund government projects, whether they wanted it or not. For many Kenyans, this felt like betrayal. And yet this is a pattern across Africa. Western-backed financial policies often leave African countries worse off, trapped in debt and deeper economic dependency. But leaders like Ruto keep signing on the dotted line. So how will Africa ever achieve the independence its heroes fought for if its leaders keep playing by the West's rules? Is Ruto trapped in a system he can't break free from? Or is he simply another leader who talks the talk but walks the other way? Because here's the thing, as long as African leaders keep following this script, they'll never earn the respect they keep demanding.